Good afternoon, Stassja. It's great to see
Hi,
you.
likewise. Thanks for having me on.
I'd like to introduce everyone to Stassja. Stassja is the woman who started up the Coalition for Biological Reality. She runs Facebook. She collaborates with a number of different organizations around gender critical products, projects, sorry. I've worked too much in tech, I always think products. And recently just finished her website. So what I'd like to do is just ask a few questions to start. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Stassja, and why you formed Coalition for Biological Reality?
Sure. So, look, my background is in office admin. Um, I think the relevant skills to what's needed in this fight. Look, it was roughly July last year. J.K. Rowling kept coming up on my feed on Facebook, and I was like, I resisted it for a good week or so, but eventually I read her essay and I was just gobsmacked. I was like, what is everyone on about? What am I not understanding here about transgenderism and transphobia? Because I agreed with everything that she had to say in that essay. Um, and then about a week later, after that, after I read her essay, I was in a feminist group and I was attacked by this woman for saying pregnant women instead of pregnant people. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have to read up on this and learn more. And the more I read, the more just shocked I was at how far this has gone. And I was like, why haven't I heard of this before? Why hasn't this been in the Australian media? And I thought, oh, I need to do something. And I just, there on the spot, started the group on Facebook.
Yeah.
One of the first women that I contacted was Anna Kerr
Yeah.
from Feminist Legal Clinic. And she pointed me in a few directions, like contact this group, contact that group. And as a result, the first wave of people to join the coalition were predominantly radical feminist women. And, and I'm glad that it worked out that way. I'm a lefty myself. Look, it is a coalition. We do have a number of right-wing members as well and Christians. My aim was to go beyond the political divide, the religious divide, because, you know, the implications of what's happening with gender identity in legislation, it just affects every aspect of society. No one's going to be able to escape it if we, continue down this path.
So you're not a particularly a purist.
No, no,
We won't deal with them and won't deal with them.
no, no.
Was that the idea of why you went the coalition way as opposed to one particular issue?
Yes. At the time when I started it as well, when I was looking into these issues, I was aware of transgender people themselves who have been harmed by this,
Yeah.
who are speaking out and saying, well, if a man can call himself a woman without the use of hormones or surgery, that kind of diminishes what a transsexual person has been through to reach where they're at. So unfortunately in Australia there aren't that many, we haven't done a lot around including transgender people, gender critical trans people. I just don't know where to find them or how to find them, but I'm sure they're out there.
Wouldn't they wouldn't they be concerned that they'd be attacked if they associate themselves with gender critical groups? The the movement seems to be fairly vicious to those people who, for example, who are detransitioners or de-sisters, but they don't seem to be much kinder to people who are transsexual who speak up either.
Yeah, sadly, they even have a word for transsexual people that speak out. They call them true scum, which
Yeah.
are just deplorable. That's
Do you know
the
much about where
attack.
that term came from? I don't even get it, why they would do that. Or was that just because of this idea that anything to do with sex is, you know, they avoid it entirely, they separate it entirely and just say it's just what you believe and what you declare is far more relevant or pertinent or real than the fact that you're male or female or
Hmm.
you believe sex is real.
Yeah, look, I'm not sure exactly where the term came from. Probably Reddit or Tumblr, I imagine. Um, but the fact that they believe in sex still,
Yeah.
gender critical transsexual people still know that they're either male or female, and they're willing to acknowledge that. I guess mm, true scum. I think it's that.
So what are your core goals or your core mission of your coalition? What is the message that you want to get out?
Uh, Look, the debate needs to be had on these issues. I think a lot of Australians are just unaware of how far down the road we already are with this legislation, particularly sex self ID. So the, this is legislation that allows, for example, a male to change his legal sex marker without surgery, without hormones, without a medical diagnosis. Um, it's dangerous for women and girls in particular. Uh, and changing the legal sex marker then gives them access to women's sport, to women's toilets, women's services. Um, and this puts women in a very difficult position. Um, but, you know, the same applies to men. Um, they might not be in physical danger from these laws.
Yeah.
However, I would ask men to consider, well, how would you feel if you're in the change rooms at the pool and a 14-year-old girl walks in and starts undressing in front
Yeah.
of you? You're going to be incredibly uncomfortable. And I think the distinction between the sexes, you know, it's necessary, it is needed in our society. And just to turn everything upside down without the majority of Australians even being aware that this is
Let
happening,
alone let alone having any input.
that's right. It's just outrageous.
So
So that
how are you getting your message out? Because how many people are on the Facebook group now? You've got two. You've got the group and you've got the public page. How many members in the group have you got?
in the group we're just over 500.
Okay. That's
Which is
pretty good. It's only
it's pretty
just
good.
turned a year.
I'd like to get it up to 20,000, but
Fair
we'll
enough.
see.
How
And
many people have liked the public page?
I think we're up to around about 3,600 by now.
Wow.
So that's doing well. I've had to bring in another person to help me run the public page. That can be a bit of a balancing act,
Yeah.
getting the message right. Sometimes some of the things that I've posted have upset radical feminists. Other times I've upset gender critical trans people.
Okay.
So it's a fine line, and I think that's one of the things I've just had to accept is you can't appease everyone all the time.
Well, you're doing a big juggling act. So, what are the main cohorts of the coalition then? You've got the radical feminists, and you've got who else?
Um, we've got men who are on side.
Okay.
Um, we've got uh, right wing women, right wing men. Um, a lot of the left wing women are, you know, are politically homeless at the moment, and
Yeah.
you know, some are persevering and trying to get the message through to Labor and the Greens, uh, uh, but you know, it just falls on deaf ears. And I understand there are a lot of women saying that, you know, who are we going to vote for next time? I'm going to have to just put in a blank ballot paper because that they can't make that switch to the right. And I understand that. I understand that completely. And at the moment, the Liberal Party here in Australia, that they've not come out with any specific position on these issues. You've got a few lone senators here and there, like Senator Chandler, who will speak out. But until the Liberal Party really step up and say, okay, we're going to make some changes and we're going to halt and slow down with this legislation. I think that makes it very difficult for left-wing women in particular as to how they're going to vote.
Okay. Well, what have been the highlights so far of this year? Since you actually started last year, I'm talking about like a period of 12 months as opposed to 2021 and 2020.
Look, I think the biggest highlight is getting the name of the group into out there in the media. So we've had a few mentions in the Australian and the Daily Telegraph, I think it's called, up in Sydney. So that's always exciting.
Well, it's been in the Examiner and the Mercury, not in a pleasant way, in Tasmania.
That's right. And Kath Deeds mentioned us on Sky News in one of her interviews. That was great. So we're just building a name for ourselves at the moment, and that's always the biggest highlight.
Okay. So what are the main lessons you've learnt from this year, do you think?
Probably what I said earlier. Can't please everyone all the time.
Yeah.
And also that it's very hard to build a coalition where people have very opposing views politically or very opposing views religious wise. For example, I had to create a new rule in the Facebook group that we're not going to discuss abortion in this group. Because
good plan.
Such a contentious issue. Yeah. That would be the biggest lesson. Balancing act.
Okay. So what are your upcoming goals for the next 12 months?
Look, I think it's just going to be continuing to work on the media aspect, getting our story out, trying to get the ABC to run a gender critical story if we can. We're doing some investigating at the moment into ACON.
It's going to be very hard for you to get ABC to do anything because they're signed up to the Australian Workplace Equality Index, which means that they're beholden to only take a pro-ACON trans view. They're not going to put a gender critical view out, even as a public tax-paid organisations. They're basically in the hands of the trans lobby.
That's right. Not yet, probably not anytime soon.
Okay.
However, when we look at what's happened with the BBC this week,
yes. Isn't that so good? I just binged it and then I binged it again. I was just this morning, I didn't do any work. I was just going through it again going, yes.
Excellent. I've only listened to 5 minutes of it so far, but
so good.
The BBC.
This, by the way, we're talking about Nolan Investigates Stonewall, and I'll put a link down below. It's excellent.
Yeah. So, the BBC were in the same position. They were signed up to the exact same scheme, except it's run by Stonewall. And now they've had a news reporter investigate, radio news.
They've been investigating for a couple of years, actually, by the sound of going through the whole lot. And ACON, by the way, is an affiliate with Stonewall. ACON is our trans lobby over here. And when I looked, LGBT Alliance sent over the old the documentation from the Workplace Equality index of Stonewall and I compared it to the Australian Workplace Equality Index, you can see where they got it. There was no creation. It was just basically cut and paste and a little bit of edit and a little bit of creativity, and that was about it.
Yep. So, that gives me hope that eventually the ABC are going to have to report on this. It's not going to go away. People seem to think that women are just going to shut up and put up with it, and it's not going to happen. So, in the absence of strong media and balanced media talking about this, it's going to require some street action. So,
well,
yeah.
Can I say, I think the resources page on the new Coalition for Biological Reality website that you're releasing this week, when's the official date, like the ribbon cutting ceremony date for the release?
I hadn't actually picked a date. Let's say today. Why not?
Okay. On that case, I don't feel so guilty.
Yes.
Oh, that's great. I'll put it in the front and back of this video. But the resources are really good to look at because it's nice 2-page information sheets, And if you're interested too, by the way, there's a lot of good videos from the oral submissions from New Zealand. New Zealand's really interesting because they always are last because of the bottom of the earth. So they've had a chance to see everything that's gone on everywhere. So I think the government was very surprised how well educated people were because the majority of, over 70% of the submissions were against everything, which they were quite surprised at, that people were that well informed. But it'd be a really good idea actually to put a page just of some of those videos and screen it through.
True.
Do you have a YouTube channel too, Stassja?
Yep, we're on YouTube.
Good.
Off the top of my head, I think it's Coalition for Biological Reality. I think I went with that name. I'll have to double check.
Okay, I'll put the link underneath as well.
Right, yeah. Yeah, actually, because you brought up New Zealand, I think it's interesting to compare how well Speak Up for Women New Zealand did the first time around when sex self-ID was being pushed, compared to Australia. And I think in Australia, we're in this really tricky position because we have such a small population on such a huge land mass. There are just fewer people willing to step up and take on these projects and put their head above the parapet. And we're fighting legislation not only at the federal level, but then all the states and territories. So it's just
all the federal, state, local, attorney general are all signed up to the Australian Workplace Equality Index, and most people aren't aware. You've basically got a trans lobby really choreographing all the not just the bills going through, but they're choreographing all policy on a corporate, university, school and government level across the board, and everyone's blind to it, thinking people are just drinking the Kool-Aid when they're not drinking the Kool-Aid, they're just being obedient to what's been put in place.
Yeah, so it just multiplies the amount of work we have to do here in Australia.
Okay.
Mm.
So what are your upcoming goals? What do you feel like you need to do moving forward without giving the opposition too much of a heads up?
Yeah. Well, we've a couple of our members have organised a forum in Hobart, Tasmania. At the moment, we have a tentative date of 27th of November. We're pretty sure that's going to go ahead, COVID allowing. So that's coming up, and I think there's a silent vigil planned out the front from trans activists. We'll see if it remains silent or not.
We'll see. They never have been.
But I think it would, if this goes well, we'd like to reproduce that in other capital cities around Australia, and hopefully that will attract some media attention. Even if it's negative media attention, I think that most Australians actually agree with us, or at least
Oh, they do.
they will agree with us once they realise what's at stake and the implications of this
Oh, they do. I
legislation.
mean, Maura Deming was on television last Sunday, and I think this is the first time people are aware of just what's being taught in the schools, which is incredibly dangerous. And last was it 2 weeks ago when a precedent was set in Australia of the state can take away your child if that child is said to be of the opposite sex, opposite gender. That WA family hasn't seen their child for 3 years.
Yeah.
So that's quite, I think Australians should be really wake up to what's going underneath their nose and just how much power the so-called highly marginalised, vulnerable community, which is not, has. That children can be taken, that the state can step in and override parental authority and remove parental rights when it comes to the care and well-being of their children. So,
Just shocking, absolutely shocking. And I think for a lot of parents, they might, you know, see that and think, oh, well, that doesn't affect me. That's not going to happen to my children. But, you know, when you hear the stories about rapid onset gender dysphoria just happening overnight, girls coming out and teenage girls especially coming out and saying, I'm a boy, I don't think anyone's safe from this.
okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Just thanks for having me on, Kat. Appreciate it.
Well, I think,
Yeah.
Stassja, there are some people who work their arse off and people, I don't think they take it for granted, but don't realise just how much work has to be done to support a community and build a community and network with all the different groups and organise the submissions and the letter writing and the different campaigns and the forums. And it's not a piece of work that gets a lot of, you know, praise or claps or things like that. But it's a bedrock of what everyone depends on to make happen. So I think you're doing amazing work, Stassja. Really
Thanks very
glad.
much. Actually, that's something I'd like to say is, you know, if you have an idea for a project and you want to work on something, do it.
Yeah.
A lot of the people involved in pushing back against gender ideology, we're just ordinary people who have decided to step up and have a go. And you know, anyone can do that. If you can write, you can be part of this. Get involved and check out our website.
Alrighty, I'll put that at the end of this, okay, and at the front.
Cheers, Kat.
All right, cheers, mate. Most appreciative of your time this afternoon.
Good to see you. Thanks, Kat.
Okay, let me stop recording.